Hello, my name is Tony, and I'm part of GMG Nashville. Welcome to GMG's Best Practices panel. We welcome GMG members from Philly, Boston, New Haven, and Nashville. Let's get started, and now let's introduce our panelists. We have 4 amazing panelists tonight. Let's start with Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Blank. I am the president of GMG. I also run Boston Fig. I do the tabletop showcase there, and I'm a game designer. I also teach game design at a couple of colleges local to Boston, so yeah.
Awesome. Heather?
Hi, everybody. Heather O'Neill, CEO of Ninth Level Games, game designer, also one of the co-founders of GMG Philadelphia.
All right. Ian?
I'm Ian Zang. I have been working in the game industry for almost a decade now, which is frightening to think that time is a thing in 2020. Who knew? But I am a professional trainer by day, and I design games and other things by night. But my new venture is Gravitation Games. I've been working, that's my own company that I just started. It's kind of neat. And then I've been working with Deepwater, IDW, and various other companies over the past 7 years to help make games better.
And Jon?
I'm Jonathan Gilmour. I'm a full-time game designer / developer. I've worked with a few different companies, and I've been designing games for about 10 years as well.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's get started. First question we have is, what questions do you ask the designers before a game starts?
One of the first things, if we're in a playtest environment, is, kind of what feedback are they looking for and where are they in the process? That's usually the first 2 things I ask if I don't already know the game. Just to get a vibe for, is this the first time they're bringing it to the table, or are they already signed and they're just trying to tweak a couple of the characters or something like that?
I agree with Heather, absolutely.
It's going to be coming right after. So.
That's usually the first things I say, just to get a baseline for the table. And then if they, if they say, I don't know what feedback I'm looking for, that adds a whole nother line of questions. But usually that's kind of a nice vague way to put it, so that if they're unsure, that will bring it up. And if they're completely sure and they said, I'm just testing these final 3 characters to decide which 2 are making it into the game, great, that's what we're going to work on.
Another question that I ask is, how would you like me to try to play? Do you want me to try to play a style that's aggressive, defensive? Do you want me to try something that is weird? Because I like doing weird, and if I have the opportunity to try, I ask first, because otherwise I'll just kind of do my own thing. But if they want a specific strategy tested, sometimes that's important to ask.
I usually ask if they want us to give our feedback during the process or hold it until afterwards too.
Yeah, one question I think I'm famous for in GMG is, who's your target market? And that's a question that oftentimes I ask it, and it's the first time the designer has ever thought of it. And that's if we're sitting down playing a kid's game, I want to get into that kid's mindset, and I'm not going to try to smash it to pieces as a strategy gamer.
Right, and it makes sense if they think it's a kid's game and you're like, this is not a kid's game, or vice versa.
Right. But it helps put you, I like to ask that right up front, because it puts you in that mindset too. I've had many times where I haven't asked it up front, and just based on the mechanics of the game, I think the target market is something different than the designer is going for. And so every piece of feedback that I give is given through that lens, and then you eventually find out, like, oh, this was supposed to be a kid's game. Oops, so.
Any tips for playtesting games and genres you don't enjoy? Do you approach it differently if it's not within the target audience?
Well, I can start because I don't care what the theme of the game is.
Mm-hmm.
I usually care about the mechanics. So a lot of people right away will, judge a game by the mechanics, but sometimes I'll think to myself, that looks complicated or that looks easy, and I'm wrong. But if it's just pirates versus ninjas versus flowers, I typically don't care because I'm like a math brain.
Yeah, it's tough to be objective sometimes, but I'm more of an experiential designer rather than mechanics or theme. I I try to when I design and when I'm playing games, I look for games that everything's really tied closely together. But I do end up playing a lot of games whose themes I'm not passionate about, and I think it's a really tough skill, but just trying to think of it as a fan of that genre helps a little bit too, because and asking that what's your target market question helps set that mindset too.
It depends on the time frame as well. If generally, I'm not a huge fan of really long play tests. I tend to let my mind wander, and I start to focus on little itty bitty things, which I shouldn't do. I should focus on the bigger picture things. What I try to do is, if I'm going to sit down to a table, I can kind of tell if it's going to be a longer one, and I say, well, can we maybe play a couple rounds? Like, can we set an end time here so that if it's going to be longer than 2 hours, let's think about maybe tying it up and then provide some feedback based on what we've seen. Because after 2 hours, you can kind of get the feel for any game regardless of what it is. I mean, even if you play Twilight Imperium, after 2 hours, it's like, okay, I get it. you know what's going on. So generally, I try to set a time limit. That's personally for me. I'm not a huge fan of really, really long games. I have like 2 games that I'm okay with that. But again, it depends on the person. Some people just do not like take-that games. I personally kind of like them, and that's fine. If you sit down and you say, play a take-that game, and it's like, oh, I'll try it, just know that letting them know that this is not my kind of game generally, but I will try my best to give you good feedback. I mean, approach it from a positive angle. I mean, that's always what you should be trying to do as a playtester if you're truly trying to help the designer, because even if it's not your kind of game, people who are like you will be playing this game if it's published. They will. And so your feedback will be absolutely essential to help the designer to figure out ways to make the experience more enjoyable for you.
Yeah, Ian, you hit on a lot of points that I was thinking as far as this goes, because I do have my type of game that I like. I have my type of game I don't like. I don't like co-op games. I literally have a shirt that says, "This is a co-op game, but I'm winning," because I love the competition of board games, and I'm just a competitive person. But that doesn't mean I can't sit down and effectively playtest a co-op game. But when I do that, I usually, like you said, Ian, I tell the designer, this is not my type of game. This is not your target market for this game. However, you can still look at that game with the lens that you have and give the feedback to the designer from that lens. Because like Ian said, not everyone who plays your co-op game is going to like co-op games. And so it's important for you to realize that you don't want others to have a bad experience with your game. And so if you have this game that's just absolutely awful for players who aren't super interested in it, well, that's some feedback that you might want to take. And whether you want to do something with it or not is a different story. But it's important for you to have those different perspectives. I will say that as a designer, I have had people sit down and play my games where my game is not their target market. And I still listen to what they say, and I still value what they say and write down what they say. And there have been many times where seeing it through a different lens has actually given me ideas on things that I want to change, or has actually, given me some other ideas or mechanics on how to fix some of the problems that I think I have with the game. So having different lenses looking at your game is not necessarily a bad thing.
I think it's a really good thing, and that actually made me think about it with your co-op comment. I used to hate co-ops, but co-ops have been really popular recently. Now I kind of like a lot of them, but maybe 5 years ago I would have said, I'm never going to play a co-op game. I hate that. Now I'm like, ooh, I like it. That's fun. But it's one of those things where you got to go in with an open mind, like Ian said. You got to go in with an open mind, and you might say, I didn't like bluffing games. Now but I like this one because it had a twist. Or don't usually like co-ops, but this is an interesting thing. I think you should, work on this, for example. It's super helpful. It's definitely opened my eyes as well, because my last game was co-op, and I, again, was not trying so hard not to make it co-op at the beginning. And then I ended up moving into co-op because of all the playtesting feedback that I got in the beginning. And sure enough, that was the way to go. So
I think it's also important too that if you're playing a game that you don't like, that you still go into it with that positive mindset. that Ian was talking about, because it's, you know, if you're a designer, nothing is more frustrating than sitting down with a bunch of people who are just like, oh, I'm playing this game, I'm not interested in this game. Like, give it your best shot. And I think as a playtester, you're going to learn something about your own design skills through that. But also as a designer, you know, don't dismiss people who aren't your target market either, because they could have some really valuable feedback. I mean, don't dismiss people in general, but you know, don't use that they're, you know, not your target market as a reason.
Just a quick question. Do you guys always write down your feedback on paper, like record it for like future?
It's weird because
That's the theme of your night.
Yeah, it doesn't. It depends. There are some things where it's like, oh, this is on this card, this thing is wrong. Well, I'm gonna write that down. But if it's more, I don't write things down in verbatim generally, because again, like John said, it's experiential. So what I tend to write down are the notes of what people were doing, how people were reacting, and what experiences felt good versus what experiences felt bad. Because there's good frustrating things and there's bad frustrating things. Bad frustrating things are things that you have no control over and they mess you up and there's nothing you can do about it. And it makes you feel bad because it's like, oh, man, really? I literally couldn't do that. The exception to that is probably in cooperative games where it's built, like the whole idea is that everything is bad all the time. It's the Battlestar Galactica, like every single round something is bad. And I saw someone post, have you ever regretted not writing down feedback? Yes, but also that's not really how my personal mind works. I'm always looking for experiences because I see connections with the game mechanics and what people were doing with them. And if I write down a single thing, it won't mean anything to me. I need that contextual feedback that is much more important to my own thing, because I end up, after a playtest session, I go back and I look at all the components and I say, oh, yeah, this one worked really well. This one was okay. Perfect is the enemy of good. Like, if a card isn't perfect, you know, that's sometimes okay. And it's not a perfect card. It's not going to be perfect. If you try to aim for perfection, your game will never come out. So that's just the long and the short of it. So no, I don't write down everything. What I do write down, though, is the experiential, the people interactions that I see. And I'll talk about this probably a little bit later in terms of designing for experience types. That's something that I do want to bring up later, but I'll yield the floor. I'm talking too much.
I write down almost everything. Even if I don't see the value in it at the time, I write it down anyways. I run a little bit of a filter over the stuff first, but almost every major or minor note that somebody says, I'll write down and then go back through it after the play test. Usually after I've had a night to sleep on it and think about things, but I find value in all of it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm kind of situational as well. It depends. Like, if let's say I'm on pub and there's people just constantly coming in, I'm alone, I might not get the feedback down that I want. I might have, I better jot down that one really important thing or that one really bad thing that I got to make sure I take out or whatever. And I'm more just going for what's the vibe I'm getting from all of the people here. But if it's something like a GMG playtest night and I'm bringing my game and I've got bandwidth to be doing it, I'm taking down a lot more notes. And then I'm sitting, like kind of like Ian said, sitting later and looking at it and saying, okay, I liked these things, I didn't like these things, this I got to look at. And then kind of take a day or two or something and then take another look at it and do the same thing. So it's similar, but yes, definitely there's been times, especially like an Unpub or at an Unpub PAX East, for example, where I wish I would have written down more, but it was in the chaos of it all. I just completely missed it. And then in the next playtest, oh, right, that was the thing I was going to write down.
I don't write it down on paper, though. I do it all digitally on my phone.
Nice.
I keep everything in Google Drive and put it directly into a notes folder for that specific game so that I can condense it down and refilter it later. And
Cool. Do you ever have anybody take notes for you guys? Because I've seen some people do that, like a tag team, and it seems very helpful. It just doesn't always logistically work for me.
When I co-design, my co-designer will usually take notes, and we'll usually do it in that same document. So we're see what the other person's writing in real time, so we're not taking duplicate notes.
Cool. Okay.
I will say
I would much rather a recording personally. That's really, like, instead of if I really need to remember everything that happened in a playtest, I just have to record it. Otherwise it's going to be lost because I'll be focused on something that was happening or something was going on. I do not like, I know writing is important, but it doesn't work for me. It just, there's something about it that I miss things when I'm writing things down because I have to have my entire focus on what I'm writing. If I don't have focus, it's going to be just word. I have dyslexia, so letters just get jumbled. So unless I'm putting my entire focus down, it's just, I'm going to lose it.
Yeah, I'll say for me, I think my students would kill me if I said that I don't write things down. So yes, I write everything down. But you all know that I am famous for bringing these one-sheeters to GMG that you can fold in half, and it has pre-written questions already written down on it. What did you think was fun? What didn't you like about the game? Allows you to track who's playtesting your game and how long it took to explain the rules and all of that. And there's actually a really good resource out there now, the Fail Faster journals, which do a lot of this.
Yeah.
But I always go into a playtest with that pre-filled out, at least the part about it where I'm writing down what my playtest goals are. And the context of what we're doing the playtest in, whether it be at GMG, whether it be at Unpub, whether it be at PAX, just so that way I have that. I do write everything. One of the big reasons why I write it down is because when playtesters see you writing their feedback down, they know you're taking it seriously, and they will continue to give you more feedback. And you'll eventually get to a point where you're like, all right, this is enough feedback, I don't need it more. But that signals to your playtesters that you're actually listening to what they're saying. And there are many times when I will have playtesters saying things that, going down on this tangent of something that I really don't want to incorporate into my game. I will still sit there and write it down. And then if you look at my notes, you'll see a whole bunch of stars over on the right-hand column. And the stars are the important things that from listening to the feedback that I really want to work on. But then I take another step. So after I've written everything down and the playtest is all over, I usually will give it a couple of hours and then I'll go back to my notes. And the last section on those sheets that I created is, what are you going to do moving forward? And so I take all of that and I synthesize it into, okay, the next iteration of my game is going to work these changes into it. And then also, here's another thing that I want to pay attention to as I'm playing this.
Cool.
To follow up on that, when Tim is saying he takes notes on feedback, I absolutely do that. So during the game, I can't be taking notes because otherwise I get lost in things. But after the game, if someone says, like, we're having a feedback session, I am absolutely taking the notes on what they're talking about. And there are very specific questions that I do ask about the game itself so that I can get better ideas about how the game was enjoyed or what worked, what didn't. Sometimes just saying what worked in the game, it's not enough direction. I think there's a question later on that talks about this though, right?
Yeah, I think there is.
Okay.
I did want to ask quickly though, do you guys take notes if you're the playtesters?
No, I can't.
I do sometimes. If it's a late game, the whole game's going to be, 10, 15 minutes in the playtest, and we're all kind of chatting about it as we go. If that's the vibe of the playtest, I will, and we're giving feedback as throughout, I won't take notes. If it's something where the vibe is to more, we're going to play a round or two and then we're going to have a talk, then yes, I'll take notes on that.
Oh yeah, I write down my thoughts and try to save them to the end.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I guess another thing that people in GMG know me for is I will fold my paper in half and do all of my writing down, and then I hand once we're done and we're finished talking about it and doing all feedback, I hand that paper to the designer so that way they have my notes written down, whether they've done their own note taking or not. And I've had other playtesters do that for me, and it's really valuable. Sometimes I have actually handed out index cards to playtesters, and I've said, as you're playing the game, write down your thoughts. Even if, a minute after you wrote down this thought, you suddenly realized why this mechanic was, in place the way that it is. I still want to know that the playtesters questioned that at one point, so that way I can make sure that I make it a little more obvious as to why what seemingly unbalanced mechanic is actually there.
Are there some things you always do when playtesting? Or is there one thing that you wish your playtesters did more often?
I can start this off with what I wish playtesters would do more often.
Yeah.
And I would love it if they would literally try to break the game strategy-wise, not by like annoying everyone, but like literally try a strategy that is just goofy, just for the fun of it, see if it works. And because sometimes there are strategies that you don't expect, and you need to be, unless someone tried to go down this random road, like, oh, no one will ever go down that road. Oh, big money and Dominion. Who would ever thought that big money and Dominion would be a viable strategy? But like, buying money and Dominion is a very strong strategy, and that's weird. Why would you do that? Look at all the cards on the table. But oh shoot, maybe we might need to consider this sort of thing. I don't know, but that's Dominion. I could write.
My friends always wondered why I always beat them in Dominion, and it was I would just start the first half of the game, you buy all the money, and then the second half of the game, you buy all the points.
Yeah. That's kind of what I want from
cards you don't need.
from playtesters is and then again, that's kind of what I said earlier, in that when I try to play a game, I try weird strategies. I try to go a little bit counter, but still within the rules, like counterculture almost, because it benefits the designer to see someone try something really weird and see how it works. And does it work? If it does, great. Is that intended? If not, then maybe rein in some things or figure some stuff out. We have a conversation about it. But that's what I love it when playtesters actually do try the weird stuff and see if it works. That just makes my heart sing.
It also, as a designer, I think, can inspire you, where if someone thought this might be a strategy that you could take in my game, well, can I actually exploit that a little and make this another strategy that is viable in my game? Because that right there is going to increase your replayability, where you get another strategy now.
Yeah, I also, when I'm playing, I kind of like to stop and clarify a lot of things. Like, I'm reading this way, right? And I appreciate it when a playtester does that for me on one of my games, because it's just, they might be messing it up and saying, I do this, right? And it's like, oh no, you don't do that. But as long as they're checking in that first round, I usually that first round ask a lot of questions. So this is what this means, this is what this means, that kind of thing. And I encourage my playtesters to do it, and I like when they do that. It's just right off the bat getting me to see if they're buying in, if they're understanding it, if it thematically makes sense, if they're telling each other what the rules are. All of a sudden, I don't even have to jump in. I'm like, oh, they picked that up quickly. Someone's like, oh, you do this, and then you do this, and this is what you do, and this is what this means. Okay, cool, thanks. So I really appreciate it when people speak up and feel comfortable speaking up. I'm definitely somebody that's comfortable talking to anybody. So I know sometimes it's hard when you come to the playtest and you're a shyer person. So I try to encourage that open conversation and feeling free to clarify or ask a question and not feel like they're going to lose the game or mess up the strategy of the game.
I would say I wish, as a designer, that playtesters would ask more questions to kind of better understand the context of the goals of your game, but also to, everyone has their own lens, and I think that lens is important, but also to kind of, when players are asking questions, that means that they're not understanding things about the game. And, I'm sure everyone that I sit down with to play test one of my games doesn't understand everything about the game. And And so if I'm hearing the same questions over and over again, I'm like, oh, I need to fix this. I also, as a play tester, I wish designers did a lot more upfront about the game before the game even gets in front of you. I think so often designers are just like, all right, here's my game, here's how you play, and don't tell you, you know, it's this type of game, I'm looking at this, here are my goals, here are the changes that I've made recently, you know, because from my last playtest to this playtest, I want to focus on these changes. So I do wish that there was a little bit more in the upfront portion before you start explaining what the game is. That tells me a little bit more about the game.
For me, I always put a lot of energy into making sure that I cover with my playtesters that they have permission to be, and I request they be as mean as possible. Like, I want to hear all the bad stuff, and I want them to be as brutally honest as possible. So a lot of times I just wish they were meaner and would tell me, you know, everything they hated about the game. Because that's really the only thing I care about.
Yeah.
Not all designers want that though. And so I would caution, if you're a playtester, you know, if you're gonna be mean, ask permission to you know, be frank or be outright about some of the feedback, because there is an art to giving feedback. And
yes,
some designers, they want you to just be blatantly like, here's what I think about your game, it sucks, and here's why. And then other designers, if you were to say that to them, they're going to be like, oh, okay, and go crawl back in their hole and never design another game.
Yeah, and there's a way to be, like you're saying, mean, John, or blunt without being actually mean. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a way to be mean. I actually remember this happening to me at one of the GMG sessions. I had a session. Afterwards, we had a regular feedback session. No one was bluntly, you know, telling me anything was broken or anything like that. Next month, I go, and one of the guys who had played it plays it again. And like, you know, this part was an issue for me, and I guess I should have mentioned it before. And then they mentioned they kind of ease into telling me that they don't like it, and this is why, and this whole thing, which of course ultimately helped me a lot to look at it. And I was like, you should have told me that. That's great. Like, I was okay, but they were nervous about it. And, you know, ultimately it helped me change that one part of my game, because I was kind of blind to it because no one else had picked up that there was a quote unquote issue with that part of the game until he brought something up at this one meeting. And next thing you know, like, that was completely changed. So I really appreciated it. And sometimes you're going to get all these, any other questions, anybody, any other points? And they go, no, it's okay. It's like, that's like the worst, you know, like, ask more questions or tell me more things. I've seen that happen at so many GMGs, and I try to, if it's not my game, jump in and, you know, maybe Timmy, you might do this too. Ask a different kind of question a different way. But, you know, again, I'd rather have more than less, and I'd rather have blunter rather than nicer comments as well. And I know that is not easy for people to do.
One really tangible piece of feedback along that line that I do, and Ian, you'll love me for this as an instructional designer, is I don't ask, do you have more questions? I ask, what questions do you have? And that right there gives them permission to have questions. Because if you say, do you have questions, they're going to read the rest of the table, see no one else has questions, and they'll shut up. But all 5 of your playtesters will have questions. So when you give them that permission, when you say, I know you have questions, what questions do you have? That right there will get them to talk. Not only when it comes to doing feedback, also when you're explaining the game, and as you explain things about the game while they're playing. What questions do you have? I always use that over, do you have any questions?
That's the teacher out of you, you know? Good call.
Is it ever okay to end a playtest early?
Absolutely, you should.
Yes.
There's very rarely a reason to play all the way through.
Okay.
Especially early in the playtesting process.
Okay.
Unless the game is like 5 minutes, like, no, just read the room. And if you're getting to a point where your playtesters are like, like, just say, the offer as the designer, just say, is it okay if we just stop here? It seems like we're hitting some stumbling blocks, and I'd just like to get your ideas about where we're stumbling here. And so just ending it there, you're going to end up with a lot of really good, meaty feedback, because it's fresh in their minds about what they didn't, what isn't quite gelling, what isn't working, and being able to move forward, because then you can rapidly iterate and actually maybe come back again in the same night and try again. It really comes down to being conscientious of people's time. And if people are not really getting it, it's like, you know, it's the same thing with like full games. Like I've played games with my wife, and she's much more picky about what kind of games she likes, and she really needs a good theme to get into things. And if I can tell, like about 2 turns into it, like she's not really getting it, and I just say, do you want to keep playing? And she's like, yeah, we'll try one more round. And then after that, it's like, yeah, it's not really doing it for me, and we just pack it up and we play a different game. It's fine. Like, we've got plenty. It's fine. So,
how do you suggest that as a playtester?
I'm trying to think. I've actually had this happen, and we encourage this as well a lot with our group. So we have one group out in the suburbs and one downtown. The suburban group is usually a smaller group, so we get more games in one night. So a lot of times what will happen is either a playtester or a designer will say, let's just stop here, do the feedback, and then maybe they'll work on some things and even come back to it. But from the playtesting, I know I've done it myself, is I've said something like, you know, something like, is this the halfway point of the game? Or, you know, do you want to finish up, just want to do 4 rounds instead of 7, or whatever it is? Something like that. If I can read the table over the designer, or I might just say, how much more time do you have? And kind of jump in there, and that might say to somebody, well, another playtester might then say, hey, why don't we just stop after the end of this round? So I've definitely done little nudges like that when I'm not in the game. And then when I'm in the game, I'll just ask, oh, is this like the halfway point? Or, you know, did you get enough here? Do you want to try out something else? That kind of thing. And typically, most of the time, they're open to that.
Yeah, I pose it to the designer as a question as well. Of, you know, I'll say, like, I feel like, you know, I have enough to give you some good feedback on this game. Is it really, like, do we need to keep playing, or do you feel like what we've done right now is enough for you to have sufficient feedback?
Right.
I don't think I've ever had a designer who's like, yeah, let's keep playing.
Nah, I don't think I have either, honestly. Yeah.
Where they're like,
I have, but they're
maybe
usually
once, but I can't remember.
it's usually the more experienced designers that think they know what they want sometimes.
So you gotta wait till the end. It's like, okay, or something. I have had people say, oh, but the end game, you know, or maybe there's a phase that's like at the end game or something. So what we'll do sometimes is that we'll just say, hey, can we just jump to that?
Yeah.
You know, if it's 7 rounds and then an end game and we're on round 4, hey, why don't we just jump to end game right now with what we have? And if you need to give us a couple more tokens or coins to make it work, that way we can feel that. I have had that happen before. Yeah.
I'll usually ask, is there anything that we haven't really seen yet?
Yep.
Just as a kind of hint that, you know, maybe there's not a lot of value in finishing it.
Yep.
Do you ever find yourself designing someone else's game for them with suggestions? How do you temper your brilliant ideas to fix their game?
As game designers, it's really hard being at a playtesting thing with other game designers. And everybody's suggestions are basically like how you could redesign the game. You know, it's just funny because we say this all the time, but it's really something that I try to watch myself do. And I've definitely had people tell me, what if you just did this? And it's like, well, yeah, I could do that, but that would be a different game, that kind of thing. So it's a tough fine line where sometimes I'll have to say, like, Tim, take all the feedback down and say, well, but I'm going for X, Y, and Z in this game, and that would almost make it a different game. So I'm going to take that down because maybe in a different iteration it'll hit that point. That way, hopefully that it will quell them going down that path too long. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But at least if I say, you know, hey, well, this is what I'm going for, and I don't want to go that far, or I don't want to cut back that much, for example, you know, it kind of draws a little bit of a line without cutting them off completely. But yes, I've definitely been at unpub tables where we're all, again, mostly it's people we know. So we're all kind of designing their game for them. It's like, oh yeah, sorry, ignore us.
But it is good to have a community like that, because it creates that atmosphere of like, no, absolutely, I value your opinion. Let's do a jam session. This is great. That's fantastic. I mean, that's ideal in a
It is fun.
testing group. Yeah. If you can just like work together as a jam session and it works well, like awesome, that's fantastic. But again, if I'm at an pub and there's a game that I see that there's like a few changes that can be made and it's like really good, I preface any feedback that I give with, I have an idea about how to maybe change up this thing a little bit. A good example of this was at Unpub, the last Unpub that I was at. It's like, yeah, I know, it was so long ago. There was a game where it was turn-based, and you were making a schedule, and it was absolutely adorable, where you're trying to like frantically try to get your schedule all delightful and perfect with your friends, and you're trying to trade off stuff. But it was turn-based, so it's like, okay, does anyone want to go to park today? And then you look around and you're like, oh, I don't know. And I said, can we try something weird? Again, I like trying weird things. That's what I do. I said, can we try this real time? This was a turn-based strategy, like a turn-based strategy. And I was just like, can we try it real time once? Just to see what it's like. And there were 4 people, the 2 designers and another person, I forget who it was. And we just played it, and it was like, oh, okay. And the designer's like, okay, this might work. It was like, I'm sorry for doing that. I just was like, it was like at the end of the night, but I asked, I was like, is this okay? Can we try this once? And if it's not working, we can just stop. I'm curious. And I think they took it and just ran with it and just was like, okay, this is cool. But again, you always ask. If you're gonna offer like a different line from what the designers originally intended, just ask. And if they're like, I really don't feel like it, just like, okay, that's fine. It's asking permission, asking is polite. It's just saying, can I do this? It's really not, a big issue just to ask. The worst thing they can say is no, and you can be okay.
Well, I will say, going off of that, one thing I keep in my mind, and it actually is a quote from the designer of that game you were just talking about, or one of the designers, where I was at a panel at PAX Unplugged last year, and she said, listen when your playtesters tell you what's wrong with the game. Don't listen when they tell you how to fix it. And I keep that in my mind as a playtester of tell the designer what's wrong with the game and what's good with the game too, but don't tell them how to fix it. And I will sometimes ask permission to say, so I have this thought, what do you think? But I try to model that for the group as a whole, to be like, we're not here to redesign your game. We're here to give you feedback on the game. And I will sometimes say to designers, like, so this is a problem. And they'll be like, so how do you think I should fix it? And I'll go, I don't know. I'm not the designer. Just leave it up to them. So as a designer, if playtesters start to do that, I try to reel it back into, usually what I find is playtesters start with, here's what you should do to fix the game. And I try to make them take a step back and be like, well, why do you want that fix? What was the problem that you saw that you think that fix is going to fix?
I don't know if you guys ever had this, but I have this a lot where it's not so much that they say, oh, I thought of this thing that I think would really work for your game. They might just kind of, in their own game designer mind, go, hey, I wonder if we did this, how this would affect this. Or I wonder, almost like they're invested in designing the game or doing the feedback. So I have had a lot of that happen where the playtesters are, and it's a good thing, they're invested and they're interested in it. And then they'll say something more to the effect of, well, I wonder if you change the currency to do X, Y, or Z, or if you did whatever. And a lot of times that will lead us to a good conversation, like you're saying, Ian. But other times, I think in some cases, it does lead us down a complete path where, depending on the designer, letting it go possibly too far in Tim's case, where next thing you know, it's been 30 minutes of this other designer's pipe dream of what this game could be. And it's like, that's cool. And that was an interesting conversation, but now we need to move on. So I've had that happen as well. And it is a fine line of when that's awesome and that's working and when it's gone too far. And it's just, again, it's reading the room and then politely either swaying them to another side or taking it offline or something like
Yeah, I'll usually offer to have that conversation after the playtest.
that.
Oh, those are some of the best conversations.
Oh yeah.
When you're at like Metatopia and then you'd like find someone a few hours later and you're like, let's go have a chat. And
Right,
you
let's
talk
just go
about
to the chat. Right, exactly.
Let's go grab some dinner and just talk about your game. It's going to be fun.
And now you have a new friend.
Exactly. That's the wonderful thing about this hobby.
That's true.
How do you manage a playtester who's caused problems for your playtests, like messing up the game or talking over people's feedback or just generally being rude?
So again, I taught middle school, so that kind of just is a natural like instinct. It's saying thank you very much for your feedback. I'd like to hear this person, and just thanking them for what they're saying, but then allowing for someone else to actually speak up. It's not that you're shutting them down. It's that you're saying thank you, but you're not the only person here. I want to hear from these people too. And it's a redirect rather than a full like stop.
Yep. I do pretty much the same thing, and I would suggest the same type of thing, as long as it's not completely hurtful. If it's just over talking and monopolizing and constantly talking about their turn and their information and their character, yes, then I would do that. If it's actually hurtful, which luckily I haven't had that happen, other than just people kind of disparaging the game itself. I've had that happen in different playtests, but as far as like personal attacks, luckily we haven't gotten anything like that. But obviously we would just ask them to leave if that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had it once at Metatopia. I had a playtester that spent the first 15 minutes of my playtest telling me everything that was wrong with Dead of Winter. And I was like, that's not the game I'm playtesting. And I was like, we can discuss this afterwards. Like, I'll go to the lobby and talk to you about it. But whenever anybody has, like, if somebody wants to spend a lot of time talking about their experience with the game and is derailing the feedback, I'll usually just offer to talk about it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just tell them, John, that sure, I'll make those changes to Dead of Winter before it gets published.
Yeah.
I'll funnel that up to them and let them decide.
Yeah, and then they started back in at the end feedback too, and I was like, listen, we got to just table this. I have 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about all of your thoughts, but
yeah,
not right now.
It does, like Heather said, it depends on how they're being rude. If they're just straight up being rude to you or to other players, like when I'm the designer and I'm playtesting the game and I see that, I kind of view myself as like the person in control of the playtest.
Yeah.
So if someone is starting to, and I've had it where playtesters just look at another one and be like, no, you're wrong, and try to shut them down as they're giving feedback. And I will look them directly in the eye and I'll be like, this is a feedback session for everyone to give feedback. And if you're not going to allow the other playtesters to give their feedback, then I'm going to ask you to leave my table.
right.
And usually that shuts them up and they won't leave the table.
And I would say if you don't feel comfortable doing that, I mean, excuse yourself and then go find one of the organizers,
Yep.
like if it is a problem.
Right.
Especially at Metatopia or wherever, like there's a lot of people to talk to.
There are some times though when I'll just let them finish and then I'll be like, okay, and then look at the next person and then be like, so Ian, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
And you can, with inflection,
Yeah.
Again, that's the
they're
redirect.
done talking about
It's like thank you for your feedback. I'd like to hear from this
Completing
person.
your feedback.
Mhm.
Now we'll move on.
Yes,
You don't get any stars on my sheet, thanks.
I will consider the feedback. I consider all feedback because based on every person has their own unique experience and how they view the world, and it's important to take all of those into account when you're designing a game because it is an experience. You want to make sure that everyone can engage on their own level.
Is it okay to Is it okay to play test my game by myself before I bring it to a group? It feels like testing alone is a trap.
No, absolutely. Please do.
Always.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of the fail faster design philosophy. So that's a big part of it is just rapidly iterating by myself or, with a single person first and trying to, stress test a lot of the things and see what fails. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of stuff. And I've done that and still had it completely fall apart when I finally put it in front of people after trying it myself. But absolutely, that should be part of the process.
I've had lots of games that I've been like, oh, this works great in my head, and then I'm like, okay, super easy to print out. Okay, I just put it together, and I put it in front of like myself, and I'm like, what is this? It's like Frankenstein's
Ian,
monster
do you
that
cut
like
that playtest
scrambling.
short?
What?
Do you cut that playtest short?
you bet your butt I do.
Yeah, no, I do that all the time. I mean, the first thing I do, it's by myself for like a good week or two before I even show like my husband. I'm just like, let me just, and I'm like, nope, like you said, I might think in my head it's gonna work, and then within 3 seconds, I'm like, no, that was wrong. Different things like that, just to get it's usually when a new game, like a new concept, like I'm thinking about the game, I've been thinking about how it's gonna work, then I'm gonna put together an index card or pieces or something, and then I'm gonna get to the next level. A lot of that's alone until it gets to the point where, okay, now I need another player. So I do that all the time, and then after a playtest session, let's say I did something on a Wednesday night, then maybe that Saturday I'll look at it again, kind of do a mock game or round or something with assumed turns, and just see what happens. Like, can it like, if everybody did this thing is it going to max out the number of cards? If everybody did this thing, is it actually going to not matter at all in the game, and nothing's going to change? That kind of thing. So I'll do that kind of testing a lot, and then put it in front of people. And like Jon said, it will change. And sometimes I'll miss something completely, of course. But I think that helps all those little iterations, especially early, get a lot of that junk out of the way. Yeah.
I mean, my design philosophy is I think about it, I put it in paper, I explain it to my wife, because she is the ultimate, like, no, that's not going to work. Because if I can't explain it myself, it ain't going to work. So I'm just going to have to, like, go back to the drawing table. So that's my first 2 steps before anyone even remotely sees it. So solo play testing, absolutely. And solo play testing looks different for everyone. So
Yeah, I think you should absolutely do it. For me, I always ask myself the question as I'm playtesting is, am I having fun? Because if I'm not having fun, then I know I don't want to put it in front of other people who aren't going to enjoy it. Right. Yet, like Jon said, there are some times where I completely get it wrong, where I'm like, oh my God, this is the best game ever. Like, I really like puzzle games. Like, this is going to be amazing puzzle. People are going to love it. I put it down in front of other people, and they're like, this is awful. What are you talking about? So, you don't always get it right, but I'm a big believer that I have to love games in order to continue working on them. If I ever fall out of love with a game, I will stop working on it. For me, if I'm not the biggest champion of my game, I'm not going to get other people to fall in love with my game. And so if I'm ever at a point where playing my game by myself, I'm just kind of like, then, that's a signal to me that maybe there's something I need to do different with this game, or just shelve it for a couple of months and come back to it.
I had a follow-up on the last question. How do you respond when designers getting defensive or arguing with feedback? Should you say something about it, or just back off, or does it depend on your relationship with the designer?
If they're being precious with their game, then that's their prerogative. Mm-hmm. And I mean, at the end of the day, you should be making the game that you want. But mm-hmm. I mean, if they're making it clear that the feedback I'm giving them isn't valuable, and I've straight up had designers tell me that, like, they weren't really looking for feedback after the playtest, and I was like, well, okay, well, we just wasted an hour and a half of my time, and there's nothing you can do if they're not going to take your feedback. They're not going to take your feedback. Mm-hmm. I just keep that in mind when they ask me to playtest the next time.
Yeah, for me, it depends on the context.
Yeah.
If it's a GMG, I mean, I run GMG, so if it's a GMG meeting and that happens, after the playtest, I will pull the designer aside and be like, hey, I just want you to know that as someone who playtested your game, you were really defensive about this. And I could just see, like, I stopped giving feedback because of how defensive you were, and I could see the rest of the designers were also shutting themselves down. And if you continue to do this, you're not going to get the right kind of feedback out of your game. But if I'm at Metatopia or Unpub, or even, at the Unpub section in PAX East, and I'm playtesting someone else's game and they're getting really defensive, I'm just like, okay, you don't want to hear my feedback, and I just get quiet and I let you go on and design your game the way you want to design your game.
Yeah, and a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah.
A lot of what I do, a lot of what I do is if I'm giving feedback to somebody again that I don't know in a different environment than GMG maybe, and they start getting defensive. A lot of times I'll just say, oh, like that's just I'll say something similar like to it, that's just like my perspective on it. Take it for what it's worth. I'm not saying that you should do this change. I'll say so, and I say that anyway. I'll say, don't take everything I say to heart and change everything, because that's also bad. But like, I'll say, this is just what I'm saying. I think you should just take all of these notes and you think about it. Like, I'll say something like that to them, especially if they're getting defensive to everybody, and you can tell they're just not happy. They're just not handling the negative feedback is usually what it is. So I'll try to kind of ease the room and just kind of say, look, just take it for what it's worth. That's all we're saying, that kind of thing. And I'll leave it at that. That's usually what I do.
Yeah, I just want you to know this was my experience.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. And if they don't choose to do anything with it, that's on them.
I hope other people don't have the same experience.
Exactly.
How much response do you think is appropriate from a designer during a feedback session?
It depends. It's kind of the answer for a lot of these, but it depends on where you are in the design. There's blind playtesting, which means no, do not get involved. Make a recording, take notes. Do not say a word though, because if you're doing blind playtesting, it means that your playtesters are learning from the start, and you're really like heat testing your game to make sure that it is up to snuff. So if you're at that point, none. But if you're really early on and you're like just trying like experimenting and really trying new things and seeing if they work, I mean, that's fine to be really hands-on and guiding through the process. But yeah, it really depends on where you are. It's really a gut feeling about how much you do. And I tend to be really involved because I just like playing games with people, and the type of games that I design now are more like light and friendly, like people to people. So I tend to just join in and just play and listen as they're playing.
I was gonna say, Ian, I think you covered it. It depends is the correct answer for that. But I will say that, it goes to, if I'm playtesting someone else's game, when we start the feedback session, asking those questions, if they haven't already explained them, of what were your goals? What were you playtesting? Unless there's something that is really glaring, if you weren't looking to playtest that specific aspect of it, I'm not going to comment on it. Yeah.
Piggybacking off that, what questions do you ask the playtesters during feedback?
Okay, this was one that I had a couple answers to. So number one, what felt bad, frustrating to you? And I defined bad, frustrating as things that you didn't have control of that you felt negatively impacted you. And what was good, frustrating? Because those are the things where you were like, that was really bad for me, but you know what? That was my own fault. Because I want more of those in the game than if we're on a seesaw, I want more good frustrating than bad frustrating. And if I can, I get rid of that entirely. So that, again, being frustrated is a good thing in games, especially if you're designing a Euro game, because you want to be like, if I make this choice, I'm going to be like, it incites that feeling in you where it's just like, you get good frustrated, and you want that sort of thing. So think about games that do that for you. And that's one of the questions that I ask. And in the terms of experience, and if you remember back, if you, the listener, the watcher of this panel, look back at your life and you think about major events in your life, there's like peaks and valleys. That's how life works. The things that you remember, especially from childhood, are the super high peaks. That you remember the things that were like awesome. And you also remember the things that were really, really bad. And you never forget them. And in a small environment, it works the same way. And the further back you go, the more like it's more of an incline. The things that pass that line, you remember. And in the scope of about an hour in your playtest, you're going to have these highs and lows. And so I ask, what was the peak high? Like, what was the most satisfying peak part of that game that you remember? The first thing that comes to mind is because it was like, yes, I felt good. And if there wasn't any, I want to know that too. Because if nothing peaked and was like, yeah, that was really awesome, then maybe I need to rework the game's mechanics so that we do get that feeling. Because you really, in the current market, you really need a game that is like, whoa, you have those highs, those peaks that really get you in, that make you want to play again. Because otherwise, you're not going to sell the game very much. And so I want to know where the peaks happened that were really, really good. I also want to know where it was like, I do not like this. And that does two things. Number one, it tells me, again, the good frustrating and the bad frustrating. So I basically ask the same question multiple times because I'm looking for peaks, I'm looking for lows, because that's the thing that people will remember going forward about my game, and I want to make sure that those moments are the ones I intend. And if they're not the ones I intend, should I be leaning into the ones that I created accidentally, or should I be trying to prune? It's a whole landscape when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I like how you're saying good frustrating and bad frustrating, because I usually, like, I make sure to ask them what was fun, because those are the things I want to keep in my game, right? Those are the moments that I want to design the game around. But then also, you know, what wasn't fun, what was frustrating, and then why was it frustrating? And oftentimes I find when players are frustrated, it's because they don't have control over something. So that now comes into player choice, and how can I give players more choice about this aspect of the game? And so I look at it like that. I also ask players the question that I think every first-time designer asks, and then after you've designed a few times, you get away from it. But it's, what did you think of the game? And it's, you know, that's just an open-ended question that you will, the first thing that people say about the game is the impression that they are left with when they finish playing your game. And so if players are like, oh yeah, I thought it was fun, then you're like, all right, I'm going down the right path with this. If they're like, yeah, it was really frustrating, it wasn't my type of game, I didn't like it, then you're like, all right, like whatever changes I've been making, I need to maybe backtrack on. So, you know, it's something that I feel like a lot of like more experienced designers get away from, but I don't know, it's also just a good opening question for them. Then I also, you know, I look at what my goals for the playtest were, and I ask them, how did you feel about this? You know, and I try to hone in on some of the mechanics or whatever the goals were of that playtest, or the goals of the game just in general.
It's probably weird and specific to me, but I actually don't ask the what did you like about this game, or what did you know, what were the positive frustrations. I don't want to hear any of those, because I feel like I should already know what's good about the game. But I see the value in other people asking it, and I think that's fine. But I do lead with the what did you think? Because you're right, that is a really good opener. But most of my questions are focused on like what players didn't like about the game. I did want to touch real quick on the frustration thing. There's a really good article by Bennett Foddy, the designer of Getting Over It, and QWOP, which is an older web-based game. And it's called the 11 Flavors of Frustration, and it's specifically about the good types of frustration, and every designer should read it.
That is a phenomenal read. So yeah, he's also the designer of Getting Over It, which is, you know, the video game with the guy in a pot and the hammer that one small step can send you back to the beginning after, you know, 12 hours of work. So
yeah, he's a professor of game design in New York, I believe, as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think what did you think about the game too? One other thing is, so when I'm watching players play my game, I'm writing notes about how they're acting, how they're reacting, and all of that. Yeah. But I know I'm also the type of player, and I see this a lot, where I'm very cerebral when I play games, and I'm very much up in my head. And I like puzzle games, and I like sitting there trying to figure whatever this puzzle is out. And I have played games where I am having the time of my life, and the designers think I am bored as anything because I have just the puzzles going through my head, and I'm trying to figure them out. And I remember being at Gen Con a couple of years ago with a designer who, he was someone that I had known for some time. And as soon as we finished playing his game, he said, "What'd you think?" And I was like, "This was an amazing game, and I had so much fun." And he just looked at me and he goes, "I thought you were gonna like pass out in the middle of the game from just being so bored." And I was like, "No." I was like, "This was me like doing all of these puzzles in my head and trying to figure out like what is my best move in this time." But he would have never known that had he not asked the question.
Yeah.
What did you think of the game?
So Tim, you really lived up to your last name.
God.
Blank-faced.
So I do the similar things that what you guys do with the best moment or the most fun moment and any low moment or least favorite part of the game, however I word that. The other thing I do, Tim, similar to what you're talking about, is like, how'd you like the game? I'll also say, would you play it again? Like, would we play this if we were going to play this again right now, would you be up for that? And again, I also make most of my games are under an hour. So it's the kind of games I want that to be the selling point of all of the games, because I want them to be so into it that they actually could play it again. And it's those kind of games. So yeah, I do that as well. But I think just leaving it open-ended right off the bat and then honing in on my goals. Let's say, like Tim said, something similar to, okay, I'm working out the end game. What did you guys feel about getting, the score differential? Like, did you feel like you were losing the whole time? When, some people will say, "Oh, I didn't realize I was close to winning," or something like that, maybe. And those kind of comments. Or I'll say, "How did you feel about getting 2 points for this instead of 1, for example? Because that was a new change." Maybe I'll mention that. Those kind of things. So specific to them. But yeah, mostly that's the same overall as the other guys. Yeah.
All right, we got a few more questions, and then we're gonna wrap it up. How do you prepare for a playtest as either a designer or a playtester, besides what you guys already talked about?
Poorly.
I would agree with John. Like, I go in as prepared as I can be. I mean, I prepare for the unexpected because I just know it's going to happen. Because that's, again, I do try to preface all of my playtests with like, try weird things. See what I want you to play how you like it. I mean, I do a talk about the different types of experiences. So I have that going in my head as I'm learning about the people. That's something that I do prepare. I do ask a couple kind of probing questions to the playtesters. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, and we can save that for a later date. But that's what I try to do. I don't really, apart from having the game ready to go, I mean, I don't really prepare anything else in terms of, again, yeah. Like most of us have been doing this for 10 years. So it's like back when I was starting, I was absolutely prepping the elevator pitch. I was learning my script, my rules. But like now it's just, I do it.
Second nature.
Yeah. At this point, it's second nature. But again, like I understand why people might prepare a script to make sure that people know how to play. It's actually good practice, especially for good rules writing, because if you can teach people how to play through like a script, you can put it down in rules. So that's a good way to practice that.
I was going to say, I don't always do it because, again, I wish I did always do it. But if it's a newer design and don't have the rules completely flushed out yet, if I know I have something coming up, I will try to write the rules, even though, again, they're fluid, just so that I have something down that right away I can kind of be looking at as we're playing and use that as almost my notes points on a newer design, on something like, let's say, Metatopia or on Pub, and I'm more like 75% of the way through the design, and I'm just going for that last 25%. Usually by then there's not much I need to prepare. It's just a matter of, like you said, being ready for the feedback and maybe a contingency plan. Like, okay, I'm pretty sure I like all these things, but I might want to add this thing in. Again, that's kind of a running commentary in my head now too, so it's a little less formally set up, but yeah, I think if it's one of your first games and you're nervous talking in front of people, which I'm not, clearly Ian is not. I will just talk to anybody, and I won't, if I flow over my words, I won't be embarrassed by it. So I'm usually not too worried about that part of it. But if that is something that bothers you, I would suggest maybe running through that script or thinking about how you're going to teach the game and get ready for feedback just mentally. That would be a good preparation, I think.
I was going to say I always have player aids made up. I don't ever write the rules ahead of time, but I always try to have some kind of player aid for the players. And I find that's a huge help.
Reference card or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that one sheet that I do, the first page is what are the goals of this playtest? What are the changes from the last playtest? What is the context of this playtest? And I write that down. That's important to me, especially like the goals and the changes, because those are the things that are going to carry over from one playtest to another. So when I go to write, what am I going to do for my next playtest? I can refer back to that. One thing that I do, which I think is kind of similar to what everyone here has said, is I don't write my rules down, but I think about how I'm going to explain those rules. Yeah. Because I think about it in the context of what a normal rule book looks like. So I can start explaining the rules to my players in a way that makes sense for them. So I'm not jumping around with, oh, but then there's this mechanic, and oh, oops, I didn't touch base on that. So, I try to explain the rules in the way that a rule book says. The other thing that it does, and Ian kind of touched base on this as well, is when it comes time to write your rules, record yourself explaining the game to your playtesters, and you have no idea how helpful that is going to be when you actually have to write these rules down. Because if you're explaining a game in the best way possible, and you can now translate that to a rule book, then you're going to have a really good rule book in the end.
Have you ever heard of the rubber duck method of coding?
No.
So this was developed by, I forget who the coder was, but he would have a little rubber duck next to his computer. And anytime he wrote a piece of code, he would explain his code to the rubber duck. Amazingly, you find a lot of problems that way. And there's a reason for it. It's because your brain doesn't connect everything properly. So you have audio audio receptors. There's audio parts of your brain, okay? That's what I'm trying to go for. And you also have verbal parts of your brain. And the way that your verbal part puts things out is interpreted by your ear on top of it. You don't know that it's happening, but it is. Try explaining your own rules to an inanimate object, and you'll realize how weird they are. How maybe you should probably revise those. So that's the rubber duck method, and I strongly recommend people try it, especially when game designing. If you're trying to talk something out, just talk it out. Don't just think about it. Actually verbalize it, because there's processes there's connections in your brain that weirdly enough work because you're saying it out loud and it goes into your ear, and the other part of your brain is like, oh, that's right.
It explains a lot about just my personal and professional life. Thank you, Ian.
All right. Okay.
Go over something in your head 10 times and then you can't actually say it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna do one more. What is your favorite or most memorable anecdote from a good playtesting session? Something positive.
Heather.
I know. I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I know Ian's. Because we're working on something right now. So.
It's actually one of Heather's games that it was. And it just was a delight. And so Heather, we were at Unpub, what, 3 years ago?
2, I think. 2
years ago. And it was late night, and I'd had some imbibement. And so I was already pretty happy, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And Heather's like, oh, come on, join us. It's a party game. I'm like, not really party game person generally, but sure, why not? Let's play it. Let's see what's going on. And I don't think I've laughed harder than I have at that game. We started with a group of what, 6 people, Heather, something like that,
Yeah.
and it
And
turned
we
into
had a game to play 8, and I think there were 15 people by the end of it because we were just messing around.
we played for 3 hours, and
It was
like,
very fun. Yeah.
it's like this like dumb little
It's a problem.
like party game, but we were playing it for 3 hours.
But Ian and I basically bonded over that night because Ian was so excited by it, and like we talked about it we're still talking about it actually. So that's a very memorable one. I'm trying to think of other ones I've had. I've definitely had some. I'm trying to think of one that aren't my other ones where I've gone to a GMG, played a game that was like amazing, and my absolute favorite is when the designer like doesn't even realize how good they are. That's my favorite. It was like, I don't know, I just made this game and they're new, and then it's really, really good. I'm just like, like, it's so nice. And then like just encouraging them and like helping them through everything. It's such a nice, like, that's like where like all of the like stress of doing all this and everything else like just pays off. So I'll have that happen. I can't pinpoint one time, but whenever that happens and they get the courage to come out and they're kind of shy and then it's a really good game, that's my favorite right
That
there.
happened with Nyctophobia. It was like, yeah, this is going to get published. Because Catherine Stipple, like, she was 16 when she designed that game for her blind uncle.
Yep.
And she was like, she showed up with this handmade wooden block with wooden pieces and like sunglasses that she'd spray painted, and it was like she sat down and was just like, oh my gosh, this game is amazing. It was something brand new, and that's, I can't say enough for having diversity in the hobby, getting new designers in. You like, with new people coming into the industry, they bring new ideas, and you just have to encourage that. And it's so cool to see new designers getting in. I can't wait to see what's coming in the next couple of years.
For me, it's about the people. I don't know. It's hard to say, like, here's like the one best moment. I can definitely tell you the one worst moment. But the one that, I mean, I look back at, and Ian, you probably don't know this, but this was on Pub a couple years ago. And we had gone to one of the hotels after, and we sat down and we played your game Constellations. And we probably talked about it for like a good 2 or 3 hours after we played. And now, in my mind, Ian was this guy who had this really good podcast about getting into the board game industry and all of this. And, was kind of someone that I listened to on podcasts. And to hear, to sit down and talk with him for hours about this game, and to have him, like, whether you did or not, you acted as though you valued my feedback. Like, I felt like I was pretty young. I felt like I was pretty young in the hobby, and to hear, like, this guy who was in the game industry really valuing my feedback was just, that kind of like gave me confidence that I needed to continue on with my game design career. And I try to do that for a lot. I mean, don't get too big of a head, Ian. But
not hard.
I try to do that with a lot of other designers, though, because I feel like, when I'm at Boston Fig, I will get these designers who have never brought their games outside of their families,
right.
And, I might be the first person that they're not related to ever play their game. And so to try to be that person that's like, no, this is a really great game, and here where the really good, here's the legs that it has to stand on. I try to be that person for other designers that might be just breaking into the hobby.
And sometimes it's time. It's literally just sitting down and talking to people and being okay. Like, when I go to Unpub, I wish it was a week. Like, that's one of my favorite conventions, and I'm really sad that it's not really happening in person this year. But like, I wish I could spend as much time as I could with every single person. It's not feasible, because that's really, like, again, that's, time is the best gift.
Valuable.
And I can't say enough about that. The reason I'm in the hobby is because of Colby Dowk and Isaac Vega. Like, I designed a weird little Tetramino movement game. It's like Tran. It was weird. It will never see the light of day. Actually, it's in that box over there. But I went down to their office in Ohio. I drove down all the way. Isaac got me coffee. He's like, oh yeah, here, let's talk about it. And they spent 2 hours with me, just talked about the game and what they were looking for, and I ended up volunteering with them, and here I am now. So like that's the best gift that you can give to anyone. It's just the time and truly meaning that you want to help them. Being part of this industry is it's a weird industry because it's not cutthroat, because everyone is out to help other people succeed. And if you're not, you end up being found out pretty quickly. So it's
Get that reputation.
yeah, it's relentlessly helpful.
That was also the night, though, that I think Ian and I fell in love with each other. So.
That's true.
John,
Oh, you're there for me, so I just fist bumped you.
you're there for me. There we go.
There we go.
But John, do you have any other?
Man, there's been so many great ones. I think probably one of my favorite experiences that really kind of reinvigorated me was last year at Metatopia. Sarah and I were playtesting Apollo, which just came out, the NASA game, and we had 2 weeks prior to Metatopia and 1 week after it to fully design the game. And we were doing major overhauls of it and playtesting it so many times during Metatopia, but just the amount of awesome feedback we got there, the amount of people that said we were crazy for trying to fully design that game in less than a month was a lot of fun and really invigorating.
When you do game design full time, though, you can make that happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Not easy though.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for spending so much time with us tonight. I really, really appreciate it. I know I do. I'm sure everyone else does. Before we wrap it up, though, I just want to take like a little like screenshot on the computer. First, I'll like wave into the camera real quick, and then we're going to call it a night. Okay. Awesome. All right, cool. All right. All right, and thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. This was GMG Best Practices for Playtesting. Have a good night.